Hey guys, it's Misty with My Paper Cuts, and I'm back with part 4 of my flower process. So this is the actual molding and assembly once you've added the color to your images or you have them cut out from your pattern paper or however you want to do it. So I did want to come back and show you guys real quick just how close those Heartfelt Creations dies cut to the line. So what I was showing you with all that messy coloring, it doesn't really impact anything. It actually makes the edges look nice and neat. So, and that's one of the leaves. You can see just how close it gets there. So I have my little pile of carnations here, and I just went ahead and colored those because I was demonstrating them. I have a poinsettia with some leaves. I have another poinsettia back here. And on this one, on a couple of the layers, I actually did some gold heat embossing with that background stamp on a couple of the layers. I thought it would be interesting just to have a couple of layers with gold. Those are, the soft blue, because I do have some blue winter papers. And then I took those really delicate penny black ones and I just did pink centers on them. So the hint that I was going to tell you with these ones that do have these really delicate centers is before you mold them, if you glue just a little circle onto the centers, it will stabilize them so that when you run them through, then these petals won't break off. I add, and I'll show you in the next video, I add a circle like this to the bottom of all my flowers anyway to give me a spot to glue them down. And so, but if you do this with these really delicate ones, and if you have a smaller circle, you could do it on the smaller flower layers. But usually when I do this one, which is my favorite poinsettia that I have right now, I will do just the base layer. And if these smaller ones do break off, then I will just tuck the petals back in with some glue when I assemble the flower. But that is an option to make it easier. So the basic thing I just want to show you is how you run it through the machine to mold it. And here is the mold I'm going to use. And this is the rose mold. And when you run it through, this is my Big Kick. I know in the Cuttlebug this sandwich works as well. But for your other machines, you'll kind of have to play with it. Sometimes I'll add a shim, sometimes I won't. It depends on how delicate the paper is that's inside and how deep I want the texture to go into the paper. It will tear in some cases if you put too much pressure through, but it does work beautifully just this way. All I use is the mold and 2 plates. You take the whole base platform out because this mold is so thick. So the thing to keep in mind is you have the one that presses down and then the wells, and I always put my flowers into the ones that press, that have the wells, the ones that go into. And it depends on which direction you want your flower to go. So if you put it down this way and the mold is pressing down, then your leaves are going to curl down. If you put it in this way, it'll press in this way and your leaves will curl up. So it depends on which direction you want them to go. If I'm doing a more 3D flower that wraps around itself, then I will put my colored side or my pattern side up. And if I want to make a flatter version of the flower, I will usually do it with the petals facing down. And of course you can alternate. You could do some going up and some going down so that your flower will have a ton of dimension. Just keep in mind which direction, and I will suggest if you're doing a really 3D flower that you color both sides so that, when the petals come up, like on this one, the white would show. So I'm going to put mine down, and yes, they are a little bit bigger, but that doesn't bother me. This is a bigger set here, but it's still going to just add some cool texture. So I just pick a well that fits closest to the petals and somewhat line them up. And like I said, this mold is not made for these flowers, but for me, it still works. It does work better if you pick a well that's a little bit bigger than your flower if you have it. But it will also work if it just barely fits. You'll see that it still adds lots of dimension. So, and I don't mind if they overlap because it's just about adding the texture. I'm not looking for perfection here. So that would be this run through with these ones. I don't like to mix colors, so like I wouldn't put those blues in with this red because I am spraying this with water, and these are colored mostly with Distress Oxide inks. This red could bleed onto that blue, so I'm pretty careful about that. So then what I do is I like this mister bottle from Distress, and I just hit it, a couple times. So I give it a good mist of water over the top. And then you take your mold and you gently set it on top where it's lined up. And I kind of give it a little press so that it seats down in there. And then I will put my cutting plate down, put my mold in, and my other cutting plate on top. And just run it through your machine. I prefer to go through once and then come back just to give it an extra little press. I pull the whole mold out and then I peel off the top. And it could stick. Now see, one tore. And that's okay because I can fix it. So usually I will try to let it sit for a few minutes and dry, but for the purposes of the video here, I'm not going to. And that's probably because it was really thick paper that I overlapped. But I can fix that when I assemble the flower. It's not a big deal. But there is the molded texture. And my white did come through, but again, that doesn't bother me because I can just go back with my inking tools and fix that. See, you can actually just cover up any of the cracking with the ink again. So that is the basic way to run it through the machine. And then you can see as you layer these, you're going to get all sorts of beautiful dimension and texture. And a really good way to pull out the items from the mold as you're doing it is I like to use my little pick here and just pick it up gently. And there again, you see the texture. And more texture, a little more cracking, but I'm not too worried about that because I can fix it. And what's really cool is when you're making vintage flowers, if you get this cracking, it's actually quite beautiful. It adds the distressing and the aging. So, and then there's the one with the torn petal. So all of my little layers for that one are done now. And then I wanted to show also, before I get to the assembly piece, how I actually would do the leaves. So then I would use this one here. And I would lay the leaves in. This one I want to curl up again, so I'm laying it face down. And I'm just laying it in there. And again, I'm just kind of using this almost like an embossing to just add some texture to my leaves. So, and again, with a couple of squirts of water, lay the mold on top, give it a little press so it kind of locks in there, run it through my die cutter. And if you have really delicate paper, you're fine to just go through the once and pull it out from the back. The other reason I'm running it back is just because it's easier with this filming position. And then lift it up. And you can see, now this circle doesn't bother me because when I assemble these flowers, that's going to cover up and just that texture is going to be sticking out. So having that little circle in the middle doesn't bother me, but you can also just press it back down with your finger. But you can see that the texture here that is getting added to my leaves. And like I said, even though it overlaps, leaves do that in nature. So that doesn't bother me either. And again, you can just, while it's still damp, you can just press that circle kind of back out if it bugs you too much. But it definitely adds more character than just these flat leaves. So that's how I would do the leaves. So I am going to go ahead and mold all the rest of these, and I will be back with the actual assembly process. Okay, so now I have everything all molded, and I had one little catastrophe with my delicate ones here with this one little petal. But basically, I just wanted to kind of show you guys the basic gluing together part that I do. So when I do assemble these, and these are probably the easiest to demonstrate on, I don't, like, I think my natural instinct is just to turn each layer so that it covers up all the gaps in between. And you can do that, but I don't always like a symmetrical flower, so sometimes I'll do them just a little bit off and then use the next layer to fill in the gap so that my flowers aren't perfectly round. And because in nature they aren't always either, especially on a poinsettia. So I won't line them all up perfectly layer by layer to fill the gaps in between. And sometimes I will do 2 layers of of one size just to add more bulk. And sometimes I will use just the smaller pieces to make a smaller flower. So like here's 2 small ones, and you could just, line those up and maybe use a medium one. You could have a medium flower. So when I'm making flowers, one of the things I will normally do is it won't look like this. Normally there would be huge piles of all the different sizes and colors, so that when I do sit down to assemble them, I have so many options. I can make large flowers, I can make very layered, I can make just a couple of layers, I can make really small flowers, especially when I do this carnation, because it's got all these tiny pieces. You can build so many different things, and this is all the pieces from just one stamp with the dies. So I used all the stamps in the dies, but all of these pieces come out of just one go through with the stamp and the die. So with the carnation, especially because carnations have a lot of layers, you can do so many different options if you just run that through a few times. So the other hint that I want to give is like on these ones, I know I want to put stamens in the middle of this blue one when I do it, so I pre-punched holes. Now you do have the option of, once you glue them together, you can always just, punch a hole or use your pick or whatever you're using to push through all of the layers. That is not as easy for me, especially if you are a hot glue person. And on the note of hot glue, of course you can use hot glue to do these, but I find when I use hot glue, it adds a lot of bulk. It puts a lot of depth between the layers. It makes them really thick. It makes them harder if you want to do stamens. So I do prefer to just use liquid glue, which, I mean, whew, you can tell I had ink all over my hands when I was using this. I use Nuvo. I have it in a little cup that holds it upside down for me. But I do prefer that because you can use a thinner layer and you don't add as much bulk to the center of your flowers. You just have to allow for a little additional dry time. You don't burn your fingers, and the beauty of when you pre-punch the holes is you can actually use your pick to hold them while you're assembling them as well. So that makes it kind of nice and easy as I drop it to to line them up and do everything if you've already pre-punched those holes. And having those holes, like I said, is the key to adding stamens afterwards. Now, if you're going to use other centers like gems or glitter or whatever, you don't necessarily need that hole in the center, but it is a handy piece to do. So, and then where these tools do come in is if you wanted to, you could start to shape your flowers by putting them on the foam like I was sharing with you guys. And if you just rub in the center, see how it brings up the flower and starts making it 3-dimensional for you. So if you really want it to be 3-dimensional, the other thing you can do if you don't want to press down into the foam is you can just hold it in the center of your hand, put whatever size of the ball you want to use, and you could just press down into the cup of your hand and you will get kind of the same effect. And that is if you really want a 3-dimensional flower. Now, most of these I'm making today, my intention is to use them a little bit flatter, so I won't necessarily be doing that. It is kind of key when you're working on a carnation to do that, because your carnations will have the best effect if you're cupping them around. And that's why if you're going to do that 3D carnation, you want to do color both sides or have double-sided pattern paper. Another thing you can do with your petals to make them even more realistic is you can pinch them, especially with like a carnation, because we know how ruffled those are, is you can go through and you can pinch and add even more texture and dimension to each layer. So you can see the difference there with that. It makes the petals even more dimensional than just the and this is easier to do if it's still damp from when you sprayed it to push it through the mold. But that is another option, and you can do that on any. You can do that with your leaves. You can go through and give it a little pinch if you want to add even more texture. You can do it with these, which these are molded so heavily I don't really feel that they need it, but you could just give it a little pinch along and add even more depth to your petals. So basically, like, let's just go ahead and do this one. So basically what I will do with these delicate ones, especially here, is I will take that little dot that I was telling you guys about. I will add a little bit of glue, and the very first layer will be on this dot. It stabilizes it. I do want to add stamens to the centers of these ones, even though they are more delicate. This gives me something to drive through, to put a hole in to add the stamens. So this one is a little bit delicate work, but it is possible. And then I will add another dot of glue, and I will do my next layer. And like I said, I'm not gonna take it necessarily and like make it perfectly round like that. I like to kind of make it so it's just a little bit not quite centered in those spots, so it slightly overlaps those other ones. It's really hard to do on camera. Easier like this. So see, it's not perfectly centered, which I've never seen perfectly round poinsettias, so that's the reason why that's important to me. And then you just keep going, and you can add another layer. And if you want, you could cover up those gaps at that point, and you still won't have a perfectly symmetrical flower, but all of that little circle at the bottom is now covered, so you can't even tell it's there. And to me, that is a beautiful poinsettia. So I will go through and do all of these layers, and that is the basic molding and assembly of my flower. And my next video will be the finishing touches that I do. I have a ton of different ways that I will add extra depth and dimension and color and sparkle to these. So as soon as I get some assembled, I will come back and share those options with you as well. I hope you guys are learning from this. I'm sorry I'm kind of all over the place. It's a lot of stuff. I keep forgetting things on each video. And hopefully, I mean, I think I'll probably share some more flower making videos down the road with specific flowers I'm making for specific projects. But I've had some people who have gotten the molds who have struggled using them, and so I'm just sharing my way of using these molds. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you soon.